The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and neither had the ache in Maya Thompson's chest. She stood in the marble hallway of the penthouse she'd never wanted, staring at the lipstick stain on her husband's collar, knowing that the woman who left it there was still somewhere in this cold, glittering prison they called home. Maya was 42 years old, with gentle brown eyes that had seen too much and hands that still bore the calluses from the years. She'd worked 2 jobs to put her husband, David, through business school, back when they lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with a leaking ceiling and shared dreams bigger than their empty wallets, back when he'd held her close and promised that when they made it, they'd make it together. But now, 15 years and $50 million later, she was alone in a house with 14 rooms, and he was in the master bedroom with someone else. She'd come home early from visiting her sister, walked through their towering front door with its crystal chandelier catching light like frozen tears, and heard the laughter, high-pitched, young, careless, spilling from upstairs like champagne no one had offered her a glass of. And when she'd climbed those stairs with her heart hammering against her ribs, she'd seen them through the cracked door. David, her David, with his salt and pepper hair that she used to cut in their tiny kitchen, with his strong hands that used to tremble when he held their newborn daughter, now wrapped around a woman who couldn't have been older than wearing the kind of dress that cost more than Maya's mother had earned in a year. Maya didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't collapse. She simply stood there, invisible, as she'd felt for the past 5 years, watching the man she'd built become someone she didn't recognize. And then she turned around, walked back down those stairs, got into her modest sedan that looked out of place in their 6-car garage next to his Bentleys and Ferraris, and drove away into the rain. She didn't go far, just to the old neighborhood where they'd started, where the streets still had potholes, and the corner store still sold lottery tickets and dreams, where Mrs. Chen still ran the laundromat and Mr. Patterson still fixed cars in his driveway. And Maya sat in her car outside their old apartment building, now faded and worn, and cried for the girl she'd been, the one who'd believed that love and loyalty were enough. Her phone buzzed 17 times, David calling, texting, each message a variation of panic and excuse. But she didn't answer. Instead, she thought about her daughter, Jasmine, away at college, brilliant and kind, who'd stopped coming home for holidays because she couldn't stand to watch her parents pretend. And she thought about her own mother, gone now for 3 years, who'd warned her that when a man changes tax brackets, he sometimes forgets the woman who helped him climb. That night, Maya stayed in a small motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and thin walls, and she felt more at peace than she had in their mansion. And in that quiet room, she made a decision not born of anger or revenge, but of self-respect and a quiet revolution that had been building in her soul for years. The next morning, she didn't go back. Instead, she went to the community center in her old neighborhood, the place where she used to volunteer before David's world of charity galas and networking events had consumed her calendar. And she asked the director, Ms. Gloria, a woman with silver braids and eyes like warm honey, if they still needed help with the women's program, the one that helped single mothers get job training in childcare while they rebuilt their lives. Baby, we always need you, Gloria said, pulling Maya into a hug that smelled like cocoa butter and hope. But are you okay? You look like you've been through a storm. And Maya, surprising herself, smiled and said, I have, but I think I'm finally heading toward the sun. Over the next 3 weeks, Maya didn't just volunteer, she'd transformed the program, using every skill she'd learned from watching David's business empire grow, every connection she'd made at those tedious cocktail parties, every ounce of intelligence and compassion that had been lying dormant while she played the role of trophy wife. She called in favors from companies for job placements, organized partnerships with local businesses for training programs, and used her own savings money her grandmother had left her, that she'd never touched, to create a scholarship fund for women going back to school. and she named it after her mother, Lorraine Hayes, who'd raised 3 children alone while working as a nurse and never once complained. The women in the program didn't know Maya was married to David Thompson, the real estate mogul whose face was on billboards across the city. They just knew her as Maya, the woman with the kind smile who stayed late to help with resumes, who brought homemade lunches because she knew some of them were skipping meals to feed their kids, who cried with them during their struggles and celebrated their victories like they were her own. Meanwhile, David was unraveling. He'd shut down his office for 2 days trying to find her, had hired a private investigator, had finally tracked her down through her credit card statement at the motel, and when he showed up at the community center on a Thursday afternoon, his expensive suit drawing stares in the worn building, Maya was in the middle of teaching a resume workshop, her face animated in a way he hadn't seen in years, her laugh genuine and bright as she encouraged a young mother who was nervous about her first job interview. He waited until the class was over, standing in the doorway like a stranger, and when the last woman left and Maya finally looked at him, her expression wasn't angry or hurt, it was peaceful, and somehow that terrified him more than any rage could have. "Maya," he started, his voice cracking in a way it never did in boardrooms, "please come home. I'm sorry." She meant nothing. It was a mistake, a stupid, terrible mistake, but Maya shook her head slowly, gathering her papers with steady hands, and said, "David, I don't think you understand. I'm not angry anymore. I was, for about an hour, sitting in the car in the rain, but then I realized something. I've been gone from myself for so long that you cheating wasn't the betrayal. Me disappearing was." He stepped closer, his eyes those brown eyes she'd once loved, now red-rimmed and desperate. "What does that mean? What are you saying? We can fix this. I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want." And she finally looked at him fully. Really looked at him, this man who'd become a stranger in a familiar face, and said, "When was the last time you asked me what I wanted? Not what charity event I'd attend, not what dress I'd wear, not what smile I'd put on for your investors. When did you last ask about my dreams, David?" The question hung in the air like dust in the afternoon light streaming through the community center's old windows, and he opened his mouth, but nothing came out because they both knew the answer. He couldn't remember. "I worked 2 jobs for 5 years while you built your first company," Maya continued, her voice soft but unwavering. "I believed in you when banks wouldn't, when your own father said you'd fail, when we had nothing but love and ambition and a prayer. I edited every business proposal. I networked when I was so tired I could barely stand. I gave up my dream of becoming a teacher because we couldn't afford for both of us to chase our goals. And I told myself it was temporary, that once you made it, we'd circle back to me, but we never did we? You made it, David. You made millions, and somewhere in all that success, you forgot that we were supposed to be a team." David's face crumpled in a way Maya had only seen once before, when his mother died, and he sank into one of the small plastic chairs that looked comical under his 6-foot frame, and whispered, "I became everything I hated. I became my father." It was true his father had been a successful but cruel man who'd cheated on David's mother for years, who'd valued money over family, who'd died rich and alone. And David had sworn he'd be different. But Maya could see the realization hitting him like a wave. He'd repeated the pattern he'd run from his whole life. "I don't know who I am without you," he said, and it wasn't manipulation. It was raw, broken honesty. "You were the only real thing in my life, and I treated you like a decoration, like another asset, and I don't know how to fix that. Maya, I don't know if I can." She sat down next to him, not touching, but close enough that he could smell her lavender lotion, the same one she'd worn for 20 years, and said, "That's the thing. David, you can't fix this by throwing money at it or making a grand gesture. You'd have to do the actual work of becoming a person worth being married to, and I'd have to do the work of remembering who I am outside of being your wife. And I don't know if we can do that together anymore." The silence that followed was heavy with grief, with the death of who they'd been and the terrifying unknown of who they might become. And finally, David asked, "What do you want me to do?" And Maya, with a strength she didn't know she possessed, said, "I want you to let me go, and I want you to figure out how to live a life that means something beyond your bank account." Over the following months, something extraordinary happened, not a fairy tale reconciliation, but something more profound. Both of them began to transform. David didn't fight the separation. Instead, he started therapy, real therapy. Not the executive coaching he'd done before, but deep, painful work with a counselor who'd grown up in poverty and didn't care about his money, who made him confront why he'd measured his worth in zeros and why he'd sabotaged the one relationship that had mattered. He cut back his work hours, something his board of directors couldn't believe, and started volunteering at a youth center in the same neighborhood where Maya was working, teaching kids from backgrounds like his own about financial literacy, but more importantly, listening to their stories, remembering what it felt like to be hungry not just for food, but for someone to believe in you. He sold 3 of his 6 cars and donated the money to Maya's scholarship fund, anonymously at first, until she found out and called him, and they had their first real conversation in years, not about his business or social obligations, but about the teenage boy in his program who reminded him of himself, and the single mother in her program who'd just gotten her first full-time job after years of struggling. They started meeting for coffee once a week, in the old diner where they'd had their first date, not as husband and wife trying to save a marriage, but as 2 people trying to remember why they'd fallen in love in the first place. And slowly, carefully, they began to tell each other the truth about disappointment, about loneliness, about how success had felt hollow, and how poverty had been terrifying but somehow more honest. Maya, meanwhile, bloomed in a way that astonished everyone, including herself. She went back to school at 42, taking night classes to finally get her teaching certification, and the women in her program cheered her on like she was their champion, because in many ways, she was. She moved into a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was hers, decorated with plants and photos and colors she loved, not the sterile beige and gray of the penthouse, and she felt like she could breathe for the first time in a decade. Her daughter, Jasmine, came home for Thanksgiving that year and cried when she saw her mother's new place, her new life, her new joy. "Mom, you're glowing. I haven't seen you this happy since I was a kid." And Maya hugged her daughter tight and said, "I forgot that I was a whole person, not just someone's wife, and I'm remembering now." Jasmine also met with her father, separately, and was shocked to find him in jeans and a t-shirt at the youth center, playing basketball with teenagers. His laughter genuine and his eyes clear in a way they hadn't been in years. And when they talked, he didn't brag about his latest deal or check his phone constantly. He asked about her life, her studies, her dreams, and actually listened, and she realized that her parents were finally growing up. The community center's annual fundraiser that December became a turning point. Maya had organized it, but David had heard about it through the youth center director, and he showed up, not as the wealthy donor looking for a tax write-off and a photo opportunity, but as a volunteer, helping set up chairs and serve food. And when people recognized him, they were stunned to see David Thompson, the man on the billboards, ladling soup and laughing with the same people his buildings had probably displaced over the years. The climax came not with a dramatic declaration, but with a quiet moment. During the fundraiser, Maya was giving a speech about the women's program, about second chances, and the courage it takes to rebuild your life. And as she spoke, her eyes met David's across the crowded room, and something passed between them, not the desperate passion of their youth, or the cold distance of their recent years, but understanding, recognition, respect. After her speech, when people were mingling and children were running around with cookies and joy. David approached her, and without the audience of their marriage or the weight of their past, he said, "I've been in therapy for 4 months now, and my counselor asked me what I'm most ashamed of, and I realized it's not the affair, my yachts, that I had everything. I had you, and I didn't even notice when you stopped singing." Maya's breath caught because it was true. She used to sing all the time, in the kitchen, in the car, while folding laundry, old gospel songs her mother had taught her, and she'd stopped years ago. And David had never mentioned it, had never noticed, until now. "I noticed," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "a few weeks ago. I heard you humming while you were setting up for a workshop, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard that sound, and it broke something in me, Maya, because I'm the reason you stopped." Tears slid down Maya's cheeks, not from pain but from the release of being truly seen. "I stopped singing because I stopped feeling like myself. But I'm finding my voice again, David, and I don't know if that voice has room for us anymore, and I need you to be okay with that." David nodded, his own eyes wet. "I'm learning to be okay with a lot of things, being alone, being uncomfortable, being someone my daughter might actually respect. My therapist said I used success to fill the hole where self-worth should be, and I used women to fill the space where real intimacy should be. And I used you as proof that I was a good person, while treating you like you were invisible, and I have to live with that. Maya, I have to live with the fact that I almost destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too broken to appreciate it." The honesty hung between them, raw and real, and Maya reached out, taking his hand for the first time in months. "We were so young when we started, and we wanted so badly to escape poverty that we didn't realize success can be its own kind of prison. You're doing the work now, and I'm proud of you for that, but I'm also doing my work, and I need to see where it leads me, not where it leads us." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know, and I'm not asking you to come back. I'm just asking if maybe, someday, when we've both become the people we're supposed to be, there might be a chance for us to meet again, as new people, and see if those new people want the same things." She smiled, sad and hopeful at once. "Maybe. But David, even if we never get back together, I need you to know that I forgive you, not because what you did was okay, but because I'm choosing not to carry that weight anymore. I'm setting it down so I can pick up my own life." The resolution unfolded over the next year like a flower opening to the sun. Maya completed her teaching certification and got a job at the elementary school in her old neighborhood, teaching 3rd grade, and her classroom became legendary for being the place where children felt safe, seen, and celebrated, where a woman who'd lost herself taught children how to find themselves. David restructured his entire business, creating a foundation that built affordable housing instead of luxury condos, and he brought in partners from the community to make sure the developments actually served the people who lived there, not just investors. And his bank account got smaller, but his sleep got better, and he started to understand what his therapist meant when she said that integrity feels better than success. He and Maya continued their weekly coffee dates, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence, rebuilding not a marriage, but a friendship, a respect, a recognition of shared history and separate futures. Jasmine graduated college with honors and gave a speech thanking both her parents, not for staying together, but for showing me that it's never too late to choose yourself, to change, to grow, and to do it with grace. The community center thrived, with Maya as the director of the women's program and David as a major supporter and volunteer, and the young woman he'd had the affair with, whose name Maya never learned and never wanted to, was revealed in gossip circles to have moved on to another wealthy man, and Maya felt nothing but pity for the girl and for the version of David who'd thought that kind of emptiness could fill his void. On the 2-year anniversary of the day Maya had driven away in the rain, she was in her classroom after hours, decorating a bulletin board with her students' artwork, when David appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee from the old diner, and he said, "I've been sober from workaholism for 23 months. I've been faithful to the process of becoming a better man for 24 months, and I've been in love with you for 22 years. But I'm finally learning what that actually means." Maya climbed down from her step stool, took the coffee he offered, and said, "And what does it mean?" He looked at her, really looked at her, really looked at her, at the woman in the comfortable dress and sensible shoes, with gray streaking through her natural hair that she didn't dye anymore, with laugh lines and strength lines and a peace in her eyes that no amount of money could buy on, said, "It means supporting your dreams, even when they don't include me. It means being grateful for what we had, and respectful of what you need. It means that if the only way I get to be in your life is as your friend and co-volunteer, and your daughter's father, then I'll be the best damn friend you ever had. Because having you in my life in any capacity is more than I deserve, and more than I thought I'd get." Maya felt something shift in her chest. Not a return to old love, but a recognition of new possibility. "You've changed, David. Really changed. I see you showing up, doing the work. Becoming someone I'd want Jasmine to bring home if you weren't her father." And he laughed, a real laugh. "That's the best compliment you could give me." She set down her coffee and looked at him seriously. "I don't know if we'll ever be married again, in the traditional sense. But I think we're learning to be partners, in a different way, partners, in purpose, in raising good humans into the world, in serving our community. And maybe that's better than what we had before, which was just a legal contract and a lot of unmet expectations." David nodded. "I'll take it. I'll take whatever you're willing to give. And I'll keep working on being someone who deserves even that much." They didn't kiss, didn't fall into each other's arms, didn't cue the romantic music instead. They finished decorating the bulletin board together, arguing playfully about whether the artwork should be arranged by color or by student name. And it was mundane, and beautiful, and real. And when they turned off the lights and locked up the classroom, walking out into the evening air, they walked side by side, not hand in hand, but together in a way that felt earned and honest, and like the beginning of something neither of them could name but both of them were willing to explore. The moral of Maya and David's story isn't about staying in a marriage or leaving one, about forgiveness or revenge, about poverty or wealth. It's about the courage to choose yourself, even when it breaks everything you've built, about the transformation that happens when you replace ego with empathy, about the truth that real love isn't possession, but liberation, and about the revolutionary act of a woman who, when faced with betrayal, didn't shrink or shatter, but instead rose up, rebuilt herself, and in doing so, created a ripple effect that transformed not just her own life, but her husband's, her daughter's, her community's, and every person who witnessed what happens when someone decides that their dignity is worth more than their diamonds, their peace is worth more than their penthouse, and their purpose is worth more than their pain, proving that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming so whole, so healed, so luminously yourself that the person who hurt you is left in awe of what they almost destroyed, and in that awe, they find their own motivation to transform, not to win you back, but to finally become worthy of the love they took for granted. And that kind of ending isn't neat or complete, but it's true, and truth, as Maya learned, standing in the rain 2 years ago, is the only foundation strong enough to build a life on.